They say the universe has a way of humbling even the mightiest civilizations. I used to believe that applied only to the young, reckless species who burned too bright and died too fast. I never thought it would apply to us, the Kethri Dominion, rulers of 17 star systems, masters of quantum warfare, and shepherds of 1,000 lesser worlds. I was Ambassador Zethkaler, third speaker of the High Council, when humanity first knocked on our doors. A single, battered ship carrying desperate refugees from a war they claimed they were losing. They spoke of terrible enemies, of worlds burning, of their people scattered across the void. They begged for sanctuary, for protection under our mighty fleet. We looked at these soft, pink creatures with their short lifespans and primitive technology, and we felt pity, perhaps even a touch of condescending kindness. How could we not help these fragile beings who seemed so lost, so broken? We gave them a small world on the edge of our territory. We thought we were being generous. We thought we were saving them. We had no idea we had just unleashed something that would reshape the very fabric of galactic power forever. What I witnessed in the years that followed still haunts my dreams. The humans we thought we had saved weren't the beaten, desperate refugees they appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. And when they finally dropped their mask of helplessness, when they showed us what they truly were capable of when pushed beyond their breaking point, it didn't just change the war. It changed everything I thought I knew about the nature of power itself. The first time I saw humans, they looked like broken toys scattered across the deck of a dying ship. Their vessel limped into the outer perimeter of the Kethri system, trailing plasma and debris, broadcasting distress signals in 17 different languages. The ship itself was a patchwork of mismatched hull, plating, and jury-rigged systems that should have fallen apart the moment they attempted faster-than-light travel. Yet somehow, impossibly, it had carried its passengers across 3 sectors of hostile space. I was aboard the diplomatic cruiser Eternal Wisdom when Admiral Karatha's voice crackled through the communication array. Ambassador Zethkaler, we've identified the vessel. It's carrying refugees from the Terran Coalition. They're requesting immediate audience with the High Council. Terran Coalition. I had heard whispers of these humans in the Outer Rim reports, a young species that had somehow managed to anger the Zarathi Collective, one of the most ruthlessly efficient military powers in known space. The reports suggested the humans had been fighting a losing war for nearly a decade, their worlds falling one by one to Zarathi bioweapons and fusion bombardments. Patch me through to their vessel, I commanded, adjusting my ceremonial robes. As third speaker of the High Council, it fell to me to handle first contact with refugee species. It was usually a formality. Desperate beings fleeing war rarely had much to offer the Kethri Dominion beyond gratitude and eventual servitude. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the interior of what appeared to be a cargo hold converted into a command bridge. Standing before me was a human female, her skin bearing the pallor of someone who had spent too long in recycled air. Her hair, a strange brown color that seemed to shift between copper and gold in the artificial light, was pulled back in a practical knot. But it was her eyes that caught my attention, a brilliant blue that seemed to hold depths I couldn't fathom. I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Coalition Defense Force, she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. I'm speaking on behalf of 47,000 refugees aboard this vessel and its escort ships. We formally request sanctuary within Kethri space. 47,000. I had seen entire star systems evacuated with fewer numbers. Admiral Chun, I am Ambassador Zethkaler of the Kethri Dominion. Your request will be given due consideration, but I must ask, what exactly are you fleeing from? Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Zarathi Collective has systematically destroyed 11 of our core worlds. They've deployed biological weapons that turn our own atmosphere against us, and their fusion bombardments have rendered entire star systems uninhabitable. We've lost nearly 2 billion civilians in the past 18 months. 2 billion. The number was staggering. Even in the brutal calculus of interstellar warfare, such losses were catastrophic. Yet this human stood before me with the bearing of someone still capable of command, still thinking strategically rather than simply surviving. I see, I replied carefully. And what are your military response? Surely the coalition has some means of retaliation. Something flickered across Admiral Chen's face, an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Our military assets have been redeployed for civilian protection and evacuation operations. We've prioritized saving lives over territory. A noble sentiment, but strategically naive. The Ketheri had not built their dominion through such idealistic thinking. Still, there was something about this human that commanded a certain respect. Perhaps it was the way she maintained her composure in the face of such devastating losses, or perhaps it was simply curiosity about a species willing to sacrifice strategic advantage for civilian lives. Admiral, I will convey your request to the High Council immediately. In the meantime, you and your ships are granted temporary safe harbor in the outer system. Medical and supply vessels will be dispatched to assist with your immediate needs. Thank you, Ambassador. There's one additional matter I need to discuss. Admiral Chun stepped closer to the holographic pickup, and for a moment I thought I saw something else in those blue eyes, something that reminded me uncomfortably of a predator choosing when to strike. Our intelligence suggests the Zarathi may pursue us into your space. We want to ensure that our presence here doesn't bring unwanted conflict to the Ketheri Dominion. The Zarathi Collective has maintained a non-aggression pact with the Ketheri for over 2 centuries, I assured her. They would not risk open warfare with us over refugee humans. Of course not, she said, but her smile seemed oddly knowing. Still, I wanted you to be aware of the possibility. The transmission ended, and I found myself staring at the blank holographic display for several long moments. There had been something about Admiral Chun that didn't quite match the image of a desperate refugee leader. Her bearing was too confident, her questions too precise, her warnings too calculated. Admiral Karatha's voice interrupted my thoughts. Ambassador, long-range sensors are detecting additional human vessels approaching the system perimeter. Looks like more refugee ships. Over the following days, those additional vessels multiplied exponentially. What had started as a small flotilla of refugee ships became a massive migration. Hundreds of vessels carrying millions of human civilians, all seeking sanctuary within Ketheri space. The ships varied wildly in design and capability, from massive colony transports to small family craft, but they all shared the same weathered, jury-rigged appearance of vessels that had been pushed far beyond their intended limits. The High Council convened an emergency session to address this unprecedented influx. Karath argued for limiting their numbers, pointing out the strain on our resources and the potential security risks. General Vextar suggested simply turning them away entirely. The Ketheri had not built their empire by taking on other species' refugees. But High Speaker Mordun surprised us all with his decision. These humans have demonstrated remarkable resilience in their flight from the Zarathi, he declared, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 7 centuries of leadership. Such determination could prove useful. We will grant them sanctuary, but on our terms. They will be settled in the Kepler 442 system. The fourth planet should be adequate for their biological needs. In exchange, they will provide labor for our mining operations and contribute to system defense as needed. Kepler 442d was a marginal world at best, habitable but barely. Rocky, cold, and resource-poor had been surveyed and dismissed by Kethri colonization efforts decades earlier. It seemed fitting for refugees who should be grateful for any world at all. I was assigned to oversee the initial settlement phase, a task I accepted with mixed feelings. Managing refugee populations was hardly the most prestigious assignment for a third speaker, but it would give me an opportunity to study these humans more closely. There had been something about Admiral Chun that continued to puzzle me, and I found myself curious about what these survivors might reveal under closer observation. The first transport arrived at Kepler 442d 3 weeks later, carrying advanced teams to establish basic infrastructure. I watched from the orbital command station as shuttles descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, landing near what would eventually become the primary settlement. The humans worked with an efficiency that surprised me. Within hours, they had established perimeter defenses, power generation, and communication arrays. Admiral Chun was among the first wave of settlers, and I made a point of meeting with her personally as she disembarked. Up close, I could see that the journey had taken its toll. Her face was thinner, her hands bore fresh calluses from manual labor, and there were dark circles under those unsettling blue eyes. Yet her bearing remained unchanged, still carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Ambassador Zeth Kaler," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I wanted to thank you personally for everything the Kethri Dominion has done for us. This world may not seem like much, but to us it represents hope." I accepted the gesture, noting the surprising strength in her grip. "I hope your people will find peace here, Admiral. The Kethri believe in providing sanctuary to those who respect our authority and contribute to the common good. You'll find that humans excel at both," she replied, and again I caught that strange smile. "We're remarkably adaptable. Given enough time and motivation, we can thrive almost anywhere." Over the following months, I visited the human settlement regularly, ostensibly to monitor their progress and ensure compliance with Kethri regulations. What I observed defied every expectation I had formed about refugee populations. The humans didn't simply survive on Kepler 442d, they transformed it. Using techniques I had never seen before, they managed to extract rare minerals from rock formations our own surveys had deemed barren. Their agricultural systems turned marginal soil into productive farmland, using modified organisms that seemed almost too sophisticated for a refugee population to possess. Most remarkably, they began developing defensive installations that incorporated design principles I didn't recognize. "Admiral Chun," I said during one of our regular meetings, "your people seem remarkably well prepared for colonization. These techniques you're employing, they suggest significant prior experience with hostile environments." She looked up from the holographic display, showing the settlement's latest expansion plans, those blue eyes meeting mine with uncomfortable directness. "Humans have always been good at making the best of bad situations, Ambassador. It's something of a species specialty." "Indeed. I've been reviewing the technical specifications for your defensive installations. The energy distribution systems are quite sophisticated, almost military grade, one might say." "One might," she agreed, returning her attention to the display. "We learned long ago that the line between civilian and military infrastructure can be fluid, especially in frontier situations. There was something in her tone that made me pause. Admiral, I hope you understand that the Ketheri Dominion maintains strict regulations regarding military installations in our territory. Any defensive systems must be approved by, of course, she interrupted smoothly. We would never presume to operate outside Ketheri law. Every installation has been submitted for review through proper channels. This was technically true. The humans had filed all the required paperwork and submitted detailed specifications for every system they constructed. But somehow, I had the growing suspicion that those specifications didn't tell the complete story. My suspicions deepened when I received reports from our intelligence division about human activity in the asteroid belt surrounding Kepler 442d. Long-range sensors detected mining operations that seemed far more extensive than necessary for a new colony's needs. When I questioned Admiral Chen about this, she explained that humans preferred to establish robust supply chains early in the colonization process. We've learned that self-sufficiency is crucial for survival, she said. The more resources we can extract and process locally, the less burden we place on Ketheri logistics networks. Again, perfectly reasonable. Yet the scale of their operations seemed disproportionate to the needs of even a rapidly growing colony. 6 months after the initial settlement, I received an urgent communication from Admiral Karath. Ambassador, we have a situation developing. Zarathi ships have been detected near the outer system perimeter. They're requesting permission to enter Ketheri space. The moment I had been half expecting since Admiral Chen's first warning had finally arrived. The Zarathi collective had come calling, and they undoubtedly wanted to discuss the human refugees we had harbored. As I prepared for what I assumed would be delicate diplomatic negotiations, I found myself thinking about Admiral Chen's warnings during our first meeting. She had seemed almost too prepared for this possibility, as if she had been expecting the Zarathi to follow them all along. The thought that perhaps these humans weren't quite the helpless refugees they appeared to be was growing stronger by the day. But if that were true, what exactly had we invited into our territory? And more importantly, what did they really want from us? I would get my answer soon enough. The Zarathi were requesting an immediate meeting with Ketheri leadership, and Admiral Chun had just sent word that she needed to speak with me urgently about matters of mutual interest. Whatever game was being played here, I had the distinct feeling that the Ketheri Dominion was about to discover we were not the ones making the rules. The Zarathi delegation arrived with the pomp and menace that had made their species legendary throughout the galaxy. 3 massive dreadnoughts dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Ketheri territory, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with the sickly green light of living weapon systems. Each vessel was a masterpiece of biological engineering, grown rather than built, capable of regenerating damage and adapting to new threats with terrifying efficiency. I stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station as their lead vessel approached, watching the way its hull shifted and flowed like the skin of some vast predator. The Zarathi had perfected the art of biological warfare over millennia, turning their own ships into living extensions of their will. It was a technology that had allowed them to conquer dozens of star systems, transforming opposition through infection rather than destruction. Ambassador Tichwa emerged from the Zarathi ship like a nightmare given form. Even by the standards of her species, she was imposing. Nearly 3 meters tall, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that indicated her rank within the collective's hierarchy. Her multiple arms moved with predatory grace, while compound eyes tracked every movement in the diplomatic chamber with mechanical precision. Ambassador Zethkaler. Her voice carried the distinctive harmonic resonance of Zarathi vocal modifications, each word seeming to come from multiple sources simultaneously. The collective appreciates the Ketheri Dominion's willingness to meet with us regarding a matter of significant importance. I incline my head in the formal gesture of diplomatic recognition. Ambassador Tichwe, the Ketheri welcome the opportunity for dialogue. However, I must note that this meeting was requested with unusual urgency. Indeed, her compound eyes shifted, creating an unsettling kaleidoscope effect. We have become aware that the Dominion is currently harboring terrorists and war criminals who have committed unspeakable atrocities against collective citizens. Terrorists, va criminals. The words hung in the chamber like an accusation. I assume you are referring to the human refugees we have granted sanctuary. Our understanding was that they were civilians fleeing the conflict between the coalition and the collective. Tichwe bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, indicating either amusement or anger. With the Zarathi, the distinction was often academic. Civilians? Ambassador, the individuals you have sheltered are among the most dangerous military operatives in known space. The human Admiral Sarachun alone is responsible for the deaths of over 3 million collective citizens. 3 million. The number hit like a physical blow. Even if it were true, it represented a scale of conflict far beyond anything the humans had described. These are serious accusations, Ambassador. Perhaps you could provide evidence. Evidence. Tichwe interrupted, her harmonics taking on a distinctly predatory tone. The evidence lies in the ashes of 7 collective worlds, Ambassador. Worlds that were thriving centers of biological research and development until humans introduced synthetic viruses designed specifically to target Zarathi neural systems. Synthetic viruses. The words triggered a cascade of realization that made my limbs go cold. The Zarathi collective's greatest strength lay in their biological integration, their ability to merge with and control living systems. A synthetic virus targeting their neural networks wouldn't just be a weapon. It would be a species-specific extinction tool. Furthermore, Tichwe continued, her multiple arms gesturing in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. We have detected unusual energy signatures emanating from the human settlement in your Kepler system. Signatures consistent with weapons research and development. That's impossible, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt the first stirrings of doubt. The humans are refugees under Ketheri protection. They would not dare, would they not? Tichwe leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like faceted gems. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you actually know about these refugees you have so generously sheltered? Have you verified their claims of victimhood? Have you investigated their true capabilities? The question struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. In the months since the humans' arrival, I had observed their remarkable adaptation to Kepler 442d, their sophisticated technology, their almost too perfect compliance with Ketheri regulations. But I had never truly investigated the darker possibilities that THYSS was now raising. The collective is prepared to overlook this oversight, THYSS continued, her tone becoming almost conciliatory. We understand that the humans can be quite persuasive when they choose to be. However, we must insist that they be turned over to collective custody immediately. In exchange, we are willing to offer significant technological and territorial concessions to the Dominion. Territorial concessions. The Zarathi were offering to trade away entire star systems for the opportunity to reclaim these human refugees. The implications were staggering. No refugee population, regardless of their strategic value, should warrant such an offer. I will need to consult with the High Council, I said carefully. Such a decision requires, of course, HFY Stories interrupted. We understand the complexities of Ketheri governance. However, I should mention that our intelligence indicates the humans are planning something significant in the very near future. Something that could destabilize this entire region of space. Before I could respond, my personal communicator chimed with an urgent message. Admiral Chan was requesting an immediate private meeting, claiming to have information of critical importance regarding Zarathi activities in the system. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Either Admiral Chun had been monitoring Ketheri communications, or she had anticipated this meeting and its consequences. Neither possibility painted the humans in the innocent light I had been assuming. Ambassador HFY, I will convey your concerns to the High Council immediately. A formal response will be provided within 48 hours. 48 hours, she agreed, though her bioluminescent patterns suggested this deadline was not negotiable. The collective trusts that the Ketheri Dominion will make the correct decision. For all our sakes. As the Zarathi delegation departed, I found myself facing questions that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. Were the humans truly refugees, or were they something far more dangerous? Had the Ketheri Dominion inadvertently harbored war criminals, or were we witnessing an elaborate Zarathi propaganda campaign? I decided to confront Admiral Chin directly. The human settlement on Kepler 442d had transformed dramatically in the months since its establishment. What had begun as a collection of temporary shelters had evolved into a thriving city with infrastructure that rivaled some of the Ketheri's own colonial installations. The streets hummed with activity as humans went about their daily routines, but I noticed details that had escaped my attention during previous visits. The civilians moved with a precision and awareness that seemed almost military in nature. Children played games that looked suspiciously like tactical training exercises. Public buildings incorporated defensive features that went far beyond reasonable safety precautions. Even the agricultural areas showed signs of dual-purpose design, crops that could feed a population or be rapidly converted to other purposes. Admiral Chun met me at the settlement's administrative center, but she was no longer alone. 3 other humans accompanied her, individuals whose bearing and demeanor suggested significant military experience. As I approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a carefully orchestrated confrontation. Ambassador Zeth Kaler, Admiral Chen said, rising from behind a desk covered with holographic displays. Thank you for coming. I assume your meeting with the Zarathi delegation raised some interesting questions. The directness of her statement confirmed my suspicions about human intelligence capabilities. Admiral Chun, I think it's time we had a completely honest conversation about who you really are and what you actually want from the Ketheri Dominion. Her blue eyes met mine with an expression I had never seen before. Not the desperate gratitude of a refugee, not the careful deference of a client species, but the calculating assessment of an equal. You're absolutely right, Ambassador. We've been less than completely forthcoming about certain aspects of our situation, such as the fact that you're not refugees at all. Oh, we're definitely refugees, one of her companions interjected. He was a tall man with prematurely gray hair and the kind of scars that suggested extensive combat experience. We're just not the helpless kind. Admiral Chun gestured for me to take a seat. Ambassador, what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change your understanding of this conflict and potentially the entire balance of power in this region of space. But before I begin, I need your word that this conversation will remain confidential until we can present our findings to the High Council formally. I settled into the offered chair, noting that the human furniture had been designed to accommodate Ketheri physiology with uncomfortable accuracy. You have my word, but I reserve the right to advise the Council as I see fit based on what you reveal. Fair enough. Admiral Chun activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of local space. Red zones marked Zarathi-controlled territory, while blue indicated human systems. But what caught my attention were the green markers, dozens of them scattered throughout supposedly empty space. Admiral, I said slowly, those green markers appear to be positioned at strategic hyperspace junction points throughout this entire sector. Very good, Ambassador. You're looking at the real scope of human presence in this region. We haven't been fighting a losing war against the Zarathi. We've been fighting a very different kind of war entirely. She manipulated the display, showing temporal data that revealed the green markers moving in coordinated patterns over the past several years. It was clearly a military deployment, but unlike any I had ever seen. Rather than massing for traditional engagements, the human forces seemed to be positioning for something far more complex. The Zarathi collective believes in conquest through biological assimilation, Admiral Chun continued. They transform populations rather than destroying them, creating perfect Zarathi client states from former enemies. It's an elegant system that has served them well for millennia. Yes, I said impatiently. This is well known throughout the galaxy. What's less well known is how they accomplish this transformation. The process isn't magic, Ambassador. It relies on biological network systems that connect all collective citizens to a central hierarchy. Think of it as a living communications and control grid that spans their entire empire. The implications began to dawn on me. You're suggesting that the entire Zarathi collective is essentially one vast organism. Exactly. And, like any organism, it has vulnerabilities. The gray-haired human stepped forward, his expression grim. My name is Colonel Marcus Webb, formerly of Terran Intelligence. For the past 15 years, we've been developing weapons specifically designed to target the Zarathi biological network. Synthetic viruses. The phrase from my meeting with HFY Stories suddenly took on new meaning. The accusations about synthetic viruses targeting Zarathi neural systems. They're true. They're true, Admiral Chin confirmed. But they're also incomplete. What we've developed isn't just a weapon. It's a complete systemic disruption tool. When deployed properly, it doesn't just kill individual Zarathi. It severs their connection to the collective entirely, leaving them as isolated individuals rather than components of a vast hive mind. I felt my understanding of the conflict begin to shift in ways that were both fascinating and terrifying. You're not just fighting the Zarathi collective. You're trying to destroy their entire civilization by disrupting the biological basis of their society. In a sense, yes, Colonel Webb said. But consider the alternative. The collective has assimilated over 40 different species in the past millennium. Each time, they promise peaceful coexistence and gradual integration. Each time, the result is the complete erasure of the target species' independent existence. Admiral Chun manipulated the display again, showing historical data on Zarathi expansion. Species after species appeared and then were absorbed into the collective, their unique cultures and capabilities subsumed into the hive mind. It was a pattern of conquest that was both more subtle and more absolute than traditional military occupation. The question facing every free species in this galaxy is simple, Admiral Chin said. Do you resist the collective now, while you still have individual agency to do so, or do you wait until resistance becomes literally unthinkable? But the scale of what you're proposing, I protested. If your weapons succeed, you could potentially kill billions of Zarathi citizens who have no choice in their government's actions. Could we? Colonel Webb asked pointedly. Or would we be liberating billions of individuals who have been denied the right to make their own choices for their entire lives? It was a philosophical question with no clear answer, but it highlighted the true scope of what the humans were attempting. This wasn't a war in any conventional sense. It was an attempt to fundamentally alter the nature of an entire civilization. Ambassador Admiral Chin said, her voice taking on a more urgent tone, "The reason we requested sanctuary in Kethri space wasn't random. Your people represent everything the collective wants to assimilate: advanced technology, military capability, and independent governance. We estimate you have perhaps 5 to 10 years before they begin the integration process." 5 to 10 years. The Zarathi had maintained their non-aggression pact with the Kethri for over 2 centuries. The idea that they were planning annexation seemed absurd, yet the logic was undeniable. The Kethri Dominion controlled resources and technology that would be invaluable to collective expansion. "You're asking us to choose sides in a conflict that could reshape the entire galaxy," I said. "No, Ambassador," Admiral Chen replied. "We're warning you that you're already a target. The only choice is whether you want to fight back while you still can, or wait until fighting back becomes impossible." As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the settlement. The holographic display shifted to show real-time sensor data from around Kepler 442d. Dozens of ships were dropping out of hyperspace in the outer system. Not the 3 Zarathi dreadnoughts that had arrived for negotiations, but a full invasion fleet. "It appears," Colonel Webb said grimly, "that the collective has decided diplomacy isn't working fast enough." Admiral Chen's expression hardened into something I was finally beginning to recognize. Not the desperation of a refugee, but the calculated fury of someone who had been planning for this moment for years. "Ambassador," she said, "I hope you're ready to see what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be victims." What happened next shattered every assumption I had ever made about human military capability. The Zarathi invasion fleet consisted of 47 vessels, including 6 of their massive bio-dreadnoughts. Each ship was a living weapon capable of regenerating damage, adapting to attacks, and deploying biological weapons that could transform entire planetary atmospheres. It was the kind of force that had broken the resistance of dozens of species throughout galactic history. Admiral Chun stood before the holographic tactical display with the calm focus of someone watching a chess game play out exactly as planned. Around her, the human command staff moved with mechanical precision, their earlier pretense of civilian refugees completely abandoned. "Status report," Admiral Chun commanded, and I was struck by how her voice had changed. The diplomatic courtesy was gone, replaced by the clipped authority of someone accustomed to commanding life and death decisions. "All stealth platforms are active and holding position," reported a woman I had previously assumed was an agricultural coordinator. "Zarathi fleet is maintaining standard approach formation. They're not detecting our deployments." Stealth platforms. In the months the humans had been mining asteroids in the Kepler system, they hadn't been extracting resources for survival. They had been constructing a military infrastructure that the Ketheri's own sensors had failed to detect. "Admiral," I said, my voice carrying a tremor I couldn't quite control, "what exactly are you planning?" She turned to me with those unsettling blue eyes, and for the first time since we had met, I saw her completely without pretense. "Ambassador, we're going to show the Zarathi Collective what happens when humans stop playing defensive." The tactical display shifted, revealing the true scope of human preparations. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt were dozens of platforms that hadn't appeared on any Ketheri sensor sweep. Weapons systems, communication arrays, and what appear to be massive computational centers, all of it invisible to conventional detection methods. Colonel Webb, Admiral Chen said, "Initiate Phase 1. Phase 1 active." Webb responded, his fingers dancing across control interfaces that materialized around him. All platforms are green. Zarathi fleet is entering optimal engagement zone. I watched in fascination and growing horror as the human plan unfolded. The approaching Zarathi vessels began to experience what appeared to be minor system malfunctions, navigation errors that led them off course, communication disruptions that isolated individual ships from fleet coordination, power fluctuations that forced them to reduce speed and conduct diagnostics. You're attacking their biological systems, I realized. But how? Zarathi biotechnology is specifically designed to resist external interference. It is, Admiral Chun agreed. But every biological system has one fundamental vulnerability. It has to maintain internal communication to function. We're not attacking their ships directly. We're introducing subtle interference into their biological networks, creating cascading failures that look like random malfunctions. As I watched, one of the smaller Zarathi cruisers began to list badly, its bioluminescent patterns flickering in what I recognized as distress signals. The ship's living hull seemed to be developing patches of necrosis, spreading across its surface like some kind of infection. "My God," I breathed. "You're killing them." "No, Kenel Guev Directive. We're severing their connection to the collective hive mind. Without that connection, their ships revert to baseline biological behavior. Essentially, they're dying the way any organism would die if its nervous system stopped functioning." It was both elegant and horrifying. The humans hadn't built weapons to destroy Zarathi ships through brute force. They had created tools to turn the collective's greatest strength, their biological integration, into a fatal weakness. The Zarathi fleet commander apparently reached the same conclusion. The remaining vessels began to retreat toward the system's edge, but Admiral Chen wasn't finished with them. "Phase 2, she commanded. Throughout the asteroid belt, concealed platforms began to activate with purposes I was only beginning to understand. Rather than weapons, they appeared to be transmission arrays of enormous power. As they came online, focused beams of some kind of energy reached out across space to touch each retreating Zarathi ship. "Were those beams?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be something I didn't want to hear. "Targeted viral transmission systems," Admiral Chun replied matter-of-factly. "We're uploading a synthetic virus designed to spread through Zarathi biological networks. Once it reaches critical mass, it will propagate throughout their entire fleet and eventually back to any collective installations they contact. A synthetic virus that could spread through the Zarathi biological networks. The implications were staggering. If such a weapon reached the collective homeworld, it could potentially sever every Zarathi citizen from the hive mind simultaneously. It would be genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded history. "Admiral," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "you're talking about the potential extermination of an entire species." "Are we?" she asked, turning to face me directly. "Or are we talking about freeing billions of individuals from a form of slavery so complete that they don't even realize they're enslaved?" Before I could respond, alerts began cascading across the tactical display. The Zarathi fleet was changing course again, but not toward retreat. They were accelerating directly toward Kepler 442d, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to the aggressive configurations that preceded planetary bombardment. "They're going to glass the planet," Colonel Webb announced grimly. "Standard collective response when biological assets become compromised. Destroy everything to prevent viral spread." I watched in growing panic as massive Zarathi biodreadnoughts aligned themselves for orbital bombardment. Each vessel carried enough firepower to render the planet's surface uninhabitable for centuries. The human population on Kepler 442d, over 50,000 refugees, according to official records, were about to be incinerated. "Admiral, you have to evacuate," I said urgently. "There's no way your people can survive what's coming." Admiral Chin's response was to smile, not the diplomatic expression I had grown accustomed to, but something far more predatory. "Ambassador, I think it's time you learned the most important lesson about humans. We don't run from fights we can win." "Phase 3, she commanded. What emerged from Kepler 442d's surface defied every law of physics I thought I understood. Massive structures that had been disguised as agricultural installations and civilian buildings suddenly revealed their true nature. Energy shields of impossible intensity sprang to life around the planet, while weapon systems that shouldn't have been able to function in atmosphere began tracking the approaching Zarathi vessels. But even more shocking was what happened to the planet itself. Areas that I had thought were terraforming projects suddenly opened like vast mechanical flowers, revealing installations that extended deep into the planet's crust. Kepler 442d hadn't been colonized by human refugees. It had been converted into a military fortress of unprecedented scale. "Ow!" I whispered, unable to comprehend the scope of what I was witnessing. "Humans have been preparing for this war for over a century," Admiral Chen explained, her attention fixed on the tactical display as Zarathi bioweapons collided with human shields in explosions that lit up local space. "The refugees you've been harboring aren't civilians, Ambassador. They're military engineers, weapons specialists, and strategic planners who have spent decades developing tools specifically designed to fight the collective." On the display, I watched as human defensive installations began to respond to the Zarathi bombardment. But their weapons weren't conventional energy beams or projectile systems. Instead, they appear to be some form of directed biological agent, streams of what looked like living matter that reached out to touch the attacking Zarathi ships. When contact was made, the results were immediate and devastating. Zarathi biohulls began to convulse and change, their organized structures dissolving into chaotic biological mass. Ships that had been functioning military vessels moments before became writhing amalgamations of uncontrolled organic growth. "You're not just severing them from the collective," I realized with growing horror. "You're turning their own biological systems against them." "The ultimate expression of biological warfare," Colonel Webb confirmed. "We call it the Prometheus Protocol. It doesn't destroy Zarathi biotechnology, it libates it, removes all external control, and lets natural biological processes take over." I watched a Zarathi dreadnought, a vessel the size of a small moon, collapsing on itself as its biohull lost structural integrity. The ship's death throes were visible as massive bioluminescent pulses that flickered and died like a dying star. Within minutes, one of the most powerful weapons in known space had been reduced to a cloud of organic debris. "This isn't war," I said, though I wasn't sure if my words were condemnation or awe. "This is something entirely different." "Yes, it is," Admiral Chen agreed. "This is evolution. The collective has spent millennia perfecting the art of biological conquest, turning entire species into extensions of their will. But they never considered that someone might develop the ability to turn that strength into a weakness." The remaining Zarathi vessels were in full retreat now, but I could see from the tactical display that it was too late. Whatever the humans had deployed was spreading through the collective's biological networks faster than the ships could flee. Each vessel that tried to escape was carrying the synthetic virus deeper into Zarathi space, where it would eventually reach their core worlds. "Admiral," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" "We've won," she replied simply. For the first time in Zarathi history, they've encountered an opponent that understands their weaknesses better than they understand their strengths. Within 6 months, the collective as we know it will cease to exist. The full implications of what I had witnessed were beginning to dawn on me. The humans hadn't been lying when they claimed to be refugees. They had been fleeing the consequences of their own actions. But they weren't victims of Zarathi aggression. They were the architects of Zarathi destruction. "The High Council needs to know about this immediately," I said, reaching for my communication device. "Of course," Admiral Chen said, but her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned about Ketheri's reaction. "But before you make that call, there's something else you should consider." She gestured to the tactical display, which now showed a broader view of local space. Red zones that had indicated Zarathi territory were beginning to flicker and change color. Green markers, human assets, were appearing throughout systems that had been under collective control for decades. The Zarathi weren't the only species preparing for this war, Ambassador. While they were perfecting biological conquest, we were building alliances with every free civilization in the galaxy. The Altarian Federation, the Crystalline Compact, the Vegan Trade Alliance, they've all been waiting for someone to prove that the collective could be defeated. As I watched, new symbols began appearing on the display. Ships from dozens of species, emerging from hidden positions throughout local space. It wasn't just a human victory over the Zarathi. It was a coordinated uprising by every civilization that had lived in fear of collective expansion. "You orchestrated all of this," I breathed. "The refugee crisis, the settlement in our territory, even the Zarathi delegation's arrival. It was all part of your plan." "Not just our plan," Admiral Chun corrected. "Our invitation. The Ketheri Dominion has a choice to make, Ambassador. You can stand with the free species of the galaxy as we reshape the balance of power, or you could try to maintain neutrality in a universe where neutrality is about to become impossible." I looked at the tactical display showing human capabilities that dwarfed anything the Ketheri had ever imagined. These weren't refugees seeking protection. They were conquerors offering partnership. And they had just demonstrated that they possessed the power to reshape galactic civilization itself. "What do you want from us?" I asked finally. Admiral Chen's smile was answer enough. "Everything, Ambassador. We want everything." The emergency session of the Ketheri High Council was unlike any meeting in our species' recorded history. Representatives from all 17 star systems had gathered in person rather than via holographic projection, a practice reserved only for the most critical decisions facing our civilization. The Great Council chamber hummed with tension as 3 centuries of Ketheri leadership tried to comprehend the full implications of what I had reported from Kepler 442d. High Speaker Mordun sat at the center of the ancient amphitheater, his 700-year-old features carved with the weight of impossible choices. Around him, the other council members displayed various degrees of shock, anger, and fascination as they absorbed the reality of human capabilities. "Let me ensure I understand this correctly," General Vextar said, his scarred features reflecting decades of military experience. "These humans have not only defeated a Zarathi invasion fleet, but have potentially destroyed the collective's ability to function as a unified entity." "That appears to be correct," I confirmed, activating the holographic recordings I had made during the battle. The council chamber fell silent as they watched Zarathi biodreadnoughts collapse into organic debris, their biological systems turned against themselves by human weapons. Fascinating, whispered scientific coordinator Lysandra, her 6 eyes focusing independently on different aspects of the display. The theoretical principles behind such weapons would require understanding of biological systems that surpasses our own knowledge by orders of magnitude. Admiral Karath leaned forward in his observation seat. Ambassador Zeth Kaler, in your assessment, what is the human's current military capability relative to Ketheri forces? It was the question I had been dreading, because the honest answer would reshape everything the Ketheri believed about their place in the galaxy. Admiral, based on what I witnessed, human military technology appears to be superior to our own. Significantly superior. The silence that followed was deafening. For over 3 centuries, the Ketheri Dominion had maintained its position through military strength and technological advantage. The idea that a species we had been treating as refugees could outmatch our capabilities was almost incomprehensible. That's impossible, General Vextar declared, his voice carrying the certainty of someone accustomed to military supremacy. No single species develops such overwhelming advantages without the knowledge spreading throughout the galactic community. Unless, High Speaker Mordun said slowly, they specifically concealed their development from the galactic community. Tell me, Ambassador, what have the humans requested in exchange for their protection? I activated my personal records, displaying the conversation I had conducted with Admiral Chun following the battle. Her words carried new weight when viewed through the lens of demonstrated power rather than diplomatic courtesy. She said they wanted everything, I reported. But she also presented their demands as an invitation to partnership rather than an ultimatum of conquest. Partnership, Economic Coordinator Thralvanks interjected, his tone skeptical. What kind of partnership is possible between species with such dramatically different capabilities? Before I could respond, alerts began cascading through the Council Chamber's communication systems. Admiral Karath's aide rushed to his side, whispering urgently in the old commander's ear. The Admiral's expression grew increasingly grim as he listened. High Speaker, Admiral Karath said, rising to address the Council. We're receiving reports from throughout Ketheri space. Human vessels are requesting permission to enter our star systems. Not refugees this time. Military ships, accompanied by vessels from over 30 different species. 30 species. The scope of human alliance building was becoming clear, and it dwarfed anything the Ketheri had imagined possible. We had thought we were dealing with refugees from a minor conflict. Instead, we had apparently hosted the command center for a galactic revolution. How many ships? High Speaker Mordun asked quietly. Over 3,000 vessels, Admiral Karath replied. And they're accompanied by a message specifically for the High Council. The main holographic display activated, revealing Admiral Chun standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a human warship. But she was not alone. Representatives from dozens of species stood beside her, including several that the Ketheri had assumed were extinct or assimilated by the collective. High Speaker Mordun, honored members of the Ketheri High Council, Admiral Chun began, her voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for an alliance of civilizations. I am Admiral Sarah Chun, representing the Coalition of Free Worlds. We come before you today to offer the Ketheri Dominion membership in an alliance dedicated to preserving independent civilization throughout the galaxy. Coalition of Free Worlds. The name itself suggested a scope of organization that challenged everything the Ketheri understood about galactic politics. For centuries, we had operated under the assumption that large-scale cooperation between species was impossible due to fundamental differences in biology, culture, and strategic interests. The Zarathi Collective has been neutralized as a threat to galactic freedom, Admiral Chen continued. But our victory has created a power vacuum that will be filled by either cooperative civilization or chaos. The Coalition offers the Ketheri Dominion full membership with retention of internal autonomy and shared access to advanced technologies developed by member species. Shared access to advanced technologies. The words carried implications that made my head spin. If the humans possessed military capabilities beyond Ketheri comprehension, what other technologies might a 30-species alliance have developed? However, Admiral Chen's tone became more serious. Membership in the Coalition requires acceptance of certain principles. Member species must abandon all forms of conquest, slavery, or forced assimilation. They must contribute to collective defense against future threats. And they must accept that some actions are considered crimes against all civilization, regardless of species-specific customs. High Speaker Mordun leaned back in his ceremonial chair, his ancient features revealing the depth of his contemplation. Admiral Chun, the Ketheri Dominion has maintained its independence for over a millennium through careful neutrality and strategic autonomy. What guarantees can you offer that membership in your coalition would not simply exchange one form of subjugation for another? Admiral Chen's expression remained diplomatic, but I caught a flicker of something harder in those blue eyes. High Speaker, the guarantee lies in demonstrated capability rather than promises. The Coalition has just proven that we can protect our members from threats that previously seemed insurmountable. The question facing the Ketheri Dominion is whether you wish to help shape the new galactic order or watch it develop without your input. It was politely phrased, but the underlying message was clear. Join us or become irrelevant. General Vextar stood abruptly, his military bearing radiating hostility. Admiral Chun, your invitation sounds remarkably similar to Zarathi integration offers. How do we know the Coalition won't eventually absorb member species the way the Collective did? Because a new voice interjected from the holographic display. The Coalition was founded on principles that are fundamentally incompatible with assimilation. The speaker was a crystalline being whose translucent form reflected light in patterns I recognized from historical records. The crystallines had been among the first species to resist Zarathi expansion, and they had supposedly been extinct for over 50 years. I am resonance of truth. Speaking for the crystalline compact, the being continued, their harmonic voice creating overtones that seemed to vibrate through the council chamber itself. My people joined the Coalition because humans offered us something the Zarathi never could: the preservation of our essential nature while providing tools to defend ourselves. The Coalition operates on a fundamental principle, Admiral Chen added. Diversity of thought and capability makes us stronger. Assimilation would eliminate the very advantages that allowed us to defeat the Collective. Scientific Coordinator Lysandra leaned forward, her multiple eyes focusing intently on the display. Admiral Chun, would Coalition membership include access to the biological weapon technologies you used against the Zarathi? Admiral Chen's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. Coordinator Lysandra, certain technologies are restricted to prevent their misuse. However, defensive applications and general technological advancement would be shared freely among member species. Restricted technologies. The humans had developed weapons capable of destroying civilizations, but they weren't willing to share them freely. It suggested a level of strategic thinking that went far beyond simple alliance building. What about species that refuse membership? Economic Coordinator Thrallvanks asked bluntly. What happens to civilizations that choose to remain independent? Nothing, Admiral Chen replied. Independent species are welcome to maintain their autonomy, provided they don't threaten coalition members or engage in activities that destabilize galactic peace. And who determines what constitutes threats to galactic peace? High Speaker Mordun asked. Admiral Chen's smile became slightly sharper. The Coalition Council, which includes representatives from all member species. Democratic decision-making, with appropriate weight given to species based on their contributions and capabilities. Appropriate weight based on contributions and capabilities. The euphemism was carefully chosen, but the implications were clear. Humans and their most powerful allies would have the greatest influence in coalition decisions. I found myself studying the alien representatives displayed around Admiral Chen, try to assess the true balance of power within this coalition. The crystallants were legendary for their defensive technologies. The Altarian Federation controlled vital trade routes. The Vegan Trade Alliance possessed industrial capabilities that rivaled the Ketheri Zone. These weren't desperate refugees seeking human protection. They were established civilizations that had chosen to ally themselves with human power. It suggested that the coalition offered genuine benefits rather than simple domination. High Speaker, I said, requesting permission to address the Council. I believe we need to consider the full implications of our decision. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of galactic power. Whether we join their coalition or not, they will be the dominant influence in this region of space. Your point, Ambassador? General Vextar asked impatiently. My point is that our choice isn't between independence and subjugation. It's between partnership and irrelevance. The humans don't need to conquer us. They're powerful enough to simply ignore us. The truth of that statement settled over the council chamber like a cold wind. For the first time in Ketheri history, we were faced with a civilization that possessed the power to treat us as we had treated countless client species, with benevolent condescension. High Speaker Mordun rose slowly from his ceremonial chair, his ancient frame carrying the weight of decision that would reshape Ketheri civilization. Admiral Chun, the Ketheri High Council requires time to deliberate on your offer. We request 48 hours to reach a formal decision. Of course, Admiral Chun replied. However, I should mention that other major civilizations are currently considering similar invitations. The coalition's expansion will continue regardless of individual decisions, and early membership may offer advantages that later applicants won't enjoy. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in tense silence. Around me, 3 centuries of Ketheri leadership struggled to process the reality that our species' future was no longer entirely under our own control. She's telling us that if we don't join now, we might not be able to join later, Economic Coordinator Thrallvanks observed grimly. Or that the terms might be less favorable for latecomers, General Vextar added. High Speaker Mordun nodded slowly. It appears that the humans have given us the illusion of choice while ensuring that only one option serves our best interests. I thought about Admiral Chen's strategic brilliance in orchestrating the Zarathi defeat, her species' centuries of preparation for galactic war, and the careful way she had presented the coalition's offer as partnership rather than dominance. High Speaker, I said quietly, I don't think they're giving us an illusion of choice. I think they're giving us the opportunity to choose our role in the new galactic order they're creating. The choice is real, but some options are definitely better than others. Over the next 48 hours, I would watch the Ketheri Dominion wrestle with a decision that would define our species' future for generations to come. And I would come to understand that the humans hadn't just defeated the Zarathi collective. They had fundamentally rewritten the rules by which galactic civilization operated. The question wasn't whether we would accept human leadership. The question was whether we would be partners or subjects in the new order they were building. 2 years have passed since the Kethri High Council voted to join the coalition of free worlds, and I can say with absolute certainty that nothing in my previous experience prepared me for the reality of human partnership. The transformation of galactic civilization has been both more subtle and more profound than anyone anticipated. Standing now in the Coalition's primary coordination center on Luna Base, humanity's ancient moon transformed into the beating heart of an interstellar alliance, I find myself struggling to comprehend the scope of what has been accomplished. Ambassador Zeth Kaler, Admiral Chin's voice interrupted my contemplation as she approached my observation platform. Even after 2 years of regular interaction, I still found her presence unsettling, not because of any hostility, but because she represented a fundamental shift in how power operated in the galaxy. Admiral, I replied, turning to face her. She looked older than when we first met, though whether from the responsibilities of leadership or the weight of decisions, I could only guess. I was reviewing the integration reports from the Outer Rim systems. Remarkable progress, she said, joining me at the panoramic viewport that showed dozens of ships from Coalition member species conducting joint operations. 18 months ago, most of these species had never cooperated on anything more complex than trade agreements. Now, they're conducting coordinated deep space exploration. It was true. The Coalition had achieved levels of interspecies cooperation that political theorists had declared impossible. But I had come to understand that this cooperation was built on a foundation most member species didn't fully comprehend. Admiral, I've been thinking about our conversation on Kepler 442d when you said humans wanted everything. I'm beginning to understand what you actually meant. Admiral Chin's expression became more guarded. Oh, you didn't want territory or resources in the traditional sense. You wanted to fundamentally reshape how galactic civilization operates. Everything about the current system, trade, diplomacy, military cooperation, even scientific research, it's all been restructured according to human organizational principles. She was quiet for a moment, watching a crystalline exploration vessel dock with a Kethri research platform. Such cooperation would have been unthinkable under the old system, where species maintained rigid independence and viewed collaboration as potential weakness. Does that concern you? She asked finally. It should, I admitted, but the results are undeniable. The Coalition has accomplished more in 2 years than most galactic civilizations achieve in centuries. Scientific advancement has accelerated exponentially. Economic prosperity has spread to species that were barely surviving before integration. Even our military capabilities have improved dramatically. This was the paradox of human leadership. They had achieved galactic dominance by making everyone else stronger. Traditional conquest sought to weaken enemies and exploit resources. The Coalition model strengthened member species while binding them into an interdependent network that made independence practically impossible. There's something you need to see, Admiral Chun said, activating a holographic interface that materialized around us. We've received the final reports from the Zorathi rehabilitation zones. Rehabilitation zone. The phrase still made me uncomfortable, despite understanding the necessity behind the concept. Following the collapse of the collective's biological network, billions of former Zorathi citizens had been left as isolated individuals without the hive-mind connection that had defined their existence for millennia. Many had simply died, their biological systems unable to function independently. Others had descended into madness as their minds struggled to cope with individual consciousness. The holographic display showed Zorathi worlds transformed beyond recognition. Instead of the organic architecture of the collective, New structures combine Zarathi biological engineering with human organizational systems and technologies from other coalition species. Former hive mind citizens were learning to function as individuals while maintaining enough biological integration to preserve their essential nature. How many? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Final casualty count is approximately 4 billion, Admiral Chen said quietly. 60% of the total Zarathi population. Most died in the first 6 months after network collapse. 4 billion deaths. Even knowing the numbers were coming, hearing them stated so matter-of-factly was staggering. It represented one of the largest loss of life in galactic history, and it had been the direct result of human weapons. However, Admiral Chun continued, the surviving population is showing remarkable adaptation. They're developing individual consciousness while retaining many of their species' biological advantages. In many ways, they're becoming more than they were before, individuals with the capability for biological integration rather than slaves to it. I studied the reports showing former collective worlds rebuilding under coalition supervision. The Zarathi survivors were indeed adapting, but they were adapting to human expectations of individual behavior and democratic cooperation. Their rehabilitation was also their assimilation into a human-designed civilization. Admiral, I said carefully, do you ever consider that what you've created might be just another form of empire? Different methods, but ultimately the same result. One species' vision imposed on everyone else. Admiral Chun turned to face me fully, her blue eyes carrying an intensity one had learned to respect. Every day, Ambassador. The difference is that our vision is designed to make itself unnecessary. How so? Traditional empires require constant expansion and control to maintain themselves. They're parasitic, they weaken their subjects to strengthen the center. The coalition model is symbiotic. We strengthen member species until they can contribute equally to collective decision-making. And when that happens, when other species possess capabilities equal to humanity's, her smile was both proud and slightly sad, then humans will become just another member species in a truly democratic galactic civilization. Our children or grandchildren will live in a universe where humanity's current dominance seems as archaic as divine right monarchy. It was a compelling vision, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it represented the ultimate expression of human strategic thinking. They hadn't conquered the galaxy through force. They had conquered it by making themselves indispensable to everyone else's success. Admiral, there's something I need to tell you, I said, making a decision that had been building for months. The Kethri High Council has been conducting secret assessments of coalition membership, not because we're planning to withdraw, but because we wanted to understand the true cost of partnership. Admiral Chen's expression became carefully neutral. And what conclusions did you reach? We discovered that withdrawal is essentially impossible, not because of military coercion, but because coalition integration has become fundamental to our society's operation. Our economy, our technology, our scientific advancement, it's all dependent on coalition resources and cooperation. We're stronger than we've ever been, but we're no longer capable of independent existence. Are you troubled by that? I considered the question carefully. The old Kethri Dominion had been independent, but stagnant, powerful, but isolated. The new Kethri civilization was integrated, growing, and more prosperous than our ancestors had ever imagined possible. But it was no longer entirely our own. I'm not troubled, I said finally, but I wanted you to know that we understand the true nature of our relationship. The coalition doesn't maintain control through force, because force isn't necessary. You've created a system where choosing to leave would be choosing civilizational suicide. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. Ambassador, I appreciate your honesty. You're absolutely correct. The coalition maintains unity through mutual dependence rather than dominance. But consider this. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Before I could respond, alerts began cascading through the command center. Admiral Chen's aide approached quickly, her expression carrying urgency. Admiral, we're receiving reports from the edge of coalition space. Long-range sensors have detected vessels of unknown configuration approaching from the galactic rim. The energy signatures don't match any known species. Unknown species from the galactic rim. After 2 years of coalition expansion and integration, it had become easy to assume that humanity had already encountered all the major players in local space. The possibility of truly alien contact was both exciting and terrifying. How many ships? Admiral Chen asked, her demeanor shifting immediately into command mode. Preliminary count suggests over 1,000 vessels, Admiral. They're maintaining formation and broadcasting signals in multiple languages, including some we don't recognize. Admiral Chun activated the primary communication array, her voice carrying to coalition coordination centers throughout local space. All coalition fleets, this is Admiral Chun. We have confirmed contact with unknown vessels approaching from the galactic rim. All member species are advised to implement first contact protocols and prepare for possible diplomatic engagement. I watched as the coalition's response unfolded with mechanical precision. Within minutes, ships from dozens of species were moving to establish defensive positions, while diplomatic teams prepared for potential communication attempts. The coordination was flawless, not because of human command authority, but because every member species understood their role in the larger system. Admiral, I said as reports continued to flow in about the approaching vessels. Whatever we're about to face, the coalition will handle it more effectively than any individual species could. That's the real measure of what you've accomplished. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Ambassador, what we've accomplished is creating a civilization capable of facing challenges that individual species couldn't survive. But this is just the beginning. The beginning of what? The beginning of humanity's real test, she said quietly. We've proven we can reshape galactic civilization to face known threats. Now we get to see if our system works against the unknown. As I watched the coalition mobilize to face this new challenge, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The humans I had first met as desperate refugees had indeed broken everything I believed about power, about civilization, about the nature of strength itself. They hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or technological dominance, though they possessed both. They had conquered it by creating a system where conquest became unnecessary, where cooperation provided advantages that no individual species could achieve alone. But perhaps most remarkably, they had built their empire on the assumption that it would eventually evolve beyond their control. They had created something designed to make their own dominance temporary, replaced by genuine galactic democracy. Whether that vision would survive contact with whatever was approaching from the galactic rim remained to be seen. But I knew that the coalition, this strange hybrid of human strategy and multi-species cooperation, represented something genuinely new in galactic history. I had watched humans release their wrath, and it had indeed broken everything I believed. But from those broken pieces, they had built something unprecedented, a galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. As the unknown ships drew closer and The coalition prepared for whatever would come next. I found myself grateful to be part of that new civilization. Whatever its flaws, whatever its hidden costs, it represented hope for something better than the endless cycles of conquest and collapse that had defined galactic history. The humans had shown us what was possible when a species thought beyond its own immediate survival. Now we would all discover whether that vision could survive contact with forces from beyond our known universe. The real test was just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I believed we had a chance to pass it.